Hello, welcome to the Expat Pod. My name's James, I'm your host, and my guest today is Jonathan Wiltz, who's my...
Hey guys.
Sorry?
Just saying hello.
Yeah, that's Johnny, or Jonathan, or John. Goes by many names, but he is my friend since 2016, 15? How long has it been?
2016, can
Yeah,
you believe
so
it?
we went to university together in the UK and been friends since. So Johnny is from South Africa, or South Africa to everyone else.
I am indeed.
Yeah, Johnny, introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks. Good intro. So pretty much as you said, my name's Jonathan. I've been in the UK for 6.5 years now, coming up to 7 in September, which is really scary. It feels like yesterday that I arrived. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. As you can imagine, some amazing parts, some difficult parts at time, but I've loved every second so far.
Awesome. Johnny, this is like the kind of first section of the podcast where I'm trying to talk about where the guest is from and how they got to where they are or where they live. So let's expand on where you're from. I know you're from South Africa, but whereabouts and go from there, really?
Yeah, good starting place, I think. So as you said, I'm from South Africa. I was born there. I grew up in Johannesburg, which is not the state capital, but I think a city that's very well known to international people. Kind of call it the financial capital, if you had to give it a name. And I grew up there. I went to school there, and then I moved to Pretoria, which is the state capital for university. And that's literally a city right next to Johannesburg. It's about a 45, 50-minute drive, so it's not too far. And yeah, I was quite fortunate to have traveled to many places around the country. It really is a beautiful country to see, an amazing holiday destination, if nobody's ever been there before. It was a really special and very unique childhood I had. I think growing up in Africa is very special.
Nice. And you're now living in England, right? So tell us how you managed to get across, and mainly for university to begin with, and why you did that, and then obviously finding jobs after that. Let's expand on those. So why did you want to leave home?
So good question. I decided to move overseas kind of for three main reasons. The first one was to do with my education. So I studied my undergrad in mechanical engineering at the University of Pretoria. And then I shortly realized after that I needed to study further to get into the line of work that I currently am in now. And really the kind of degrees or the field of education that offers the degrees I need to do, which in my case was automotive engineering, was either in the UK or in the US. So I chose the UK because of my visa options and that kind of stuff. So that was sort of point number one. Point number two leads on from the first, which was my career. So I wanted to get into sort of automotive engineering R&D. Which is an amazing field of work to be in. It's what I currently work in now. And South Africa doesn't really do that side of the industry. They have a massive automotive manufacturing industry, but on the R&D side, it's predominantly in the Northern Hemisphere. So that was point number two. And then thirdly, I think after sort of growing up and living in more or less the same place, I mean, as I said, I was fortunate to travel to many areas around the country. I just felt like I needed a bit of an adventure and to see more of the world. So it was kind of those three main reasons why I moved to the UK. And that was 6.5 years ago now. I mean, it's crazy. It feels like yesterday.
And how easy was it for you to do that? Like, obviously, I've always wanted to just live somewhere else, but how do you start that process? What's the first thing you do?
It's not a quick thing. It takes a lot of planning. So in my case, I came to university, which is kind of a whole different route to move overseas. The UK is, world renowned for having international students, especially at postgrad level. So I applied to Oxford Brookes University, which is obviously where I met you, and we studied together. And I was fortunate enough to get an unconditional offer, which was awesome, and that kind of set my arrival date and what I was going to do when I first got here for at least the first year. And as many South Africans do when they move overseas, I had to get a visa. So a lot of people get work visas, usually requiring sponsorship. So they have to get a job and then their company either pays for or offers to help them with their paperwork. In my case, it was a bit different. So for the UK, there's a special visa type called an ancestral visa. And basically, you're entitled to that if you can prove that your grandparents, so it's quite specific, it's your grandparents had to be born in the UK. So obviously, we had all the paperwork and the birth certificates and that kind of stuff. So I applied and I got that visa, and that visa allowed me to live and study without restriction in the UK for 5 years. So I think I put that application in probably in early August, and it took about a month to process. And then in mid-September, I came over to the UK.
And what was it like leaving and like accommodation, sorting it out, and obviously all from a different hemisphere, and obviously the time zone is not too bad, but how did you find accommodation? Did you get a lot of help from that?
So first of all, what was it like leaving? It was very exciting, but very frightening at the same time. I mean, it kind of felt like I just packed 2 suitcases, and got on a plane and headed north, really. But I think because I went to university, I think some would say it was a bit of a softer landing. So I stayed in university accommodation, which was really great because it allowed me to basically have accommodation from the first day that I got there. And really, I mean, that was a bit like the degree. You put in an application. Luckily, I got accepted and I got allocated a room in the postgrad residence. And then, of course, I needed all that documentation as part of my supporting documentation for my visa, because you've got to prove what you're going to do and where you're going to live, at least for the first sort of year and a half type of stuff, or time period, rather.
What did your family think about you wanting to leave and move, or how do they take it?
They were really supportive, which is something I've always been very appreciative of. I think they obviously, they were quite sad, which is understandable. And I was sad as well, but I knew it was the right thing for me because I'm very close with my family. And there's been lots of times where I've missed them a lot. And homesickness is a real thing. I definitely had it for a while. When you first move overseas, you kind of feel like you're on an extended holiday for a bit. You almost have in your mind that you're going to go back. And then after maybe a month or two, you realize that's not the case. And then it kicks in. Again, lucky enough, because I was at university, I was kind of thrown into an area or an environment with people more or less my age, and you're forced to, well, not forced, but there's so many opportunities to integrate and make friends and that kind of stuff, and that really helped.
I moved to Sweden, but as an adult for a job. At university, you move, and everyone else moves for the same reason, and usually move by themselves. So everyone's looking to make friends. The friendship group we had when we were studying together. Whereas now that I moved away to Sweden, and when you move to London, I guess from the Midlands, you go as an adult, and it's really hard to build those relationships you may have done at university. It's quite an interesting point you bring up.
Absolutely.
With that.
Yeah, no, for sure. So just to give a bit more background into that. So again, I've been fortunate to live in various places of the UK, which has made this, I think, the experience even more special, because I've seen how life is in different areas. So I started off in Oxford, where Oxford Brookes is based, and I was there for a year. And then when I got my first job, I moved up to the West Midlands, and I lived in a town called Leamington Spa, which was, I think, as beautiful as any English town could be. So it was a very special time in my life, and I lived there for 3.5 years over COVID, which is definitely significant. And then in June 2021, I changed roles and I moved down to London. So I moved from a smaller city to a small town to a super big city. And I was fortunate enough to have, old school friends and old university friends that also live in London now. And that definitely sort of formed the basis of my new social circle here. But it's difficult to meet new people, especially in big cities. And I must be honest with you, I've met some new people here, but the majority of my social group in London are very much the people that I knew before I came to the city.
I do find that with London, that for a city with 12 million people, probably more now, it's really lonely because no one talks to you on the tube. And I'm from the north of England. We talk to everyone. And you go on the tube and everyone's there on their phones. And I'm not like...
That's so true. Nobody talks London, on the tube. And if you say something, people think you're mad.
And, people from London, if you think you do talk, then, please do it more because, people who aren't from London, we don't notice it as much. So it might be a different.
And it's one of the few times where you can just sit down and kind of people watch. Life is so busy in the city. It's actually a great opportunity to start chatting to people, because you've got, depending on your journey, you could have 10 minutes, you could have half an hour where you're literally forced to sit down and you could start chatting to someone. So maybe I should start a trend.
Yeah, you might meet your next friends or whatever. You don't know what can happen from that. Should be a. I think it should be a movement we have to try and get in. Is every time you go on public transport, talk to the first person you see. Just ask them how they are. It might make the day.
Absolutely, I'd be down for that. I'd sign that petition.
Awesome. Well, that's a great way to end the kind of first segment, I guess, of this podcast. So we'll see you for part 2. Hey, and welcome back to section 2 of the podcast. This is where we kind of talk about first impressions, being in the country, what people feel like when they first get there, and how day-to-day life is. So Johnny, what was your first impression or the biggest shock you had when you first moved to the UK?
Yeah, it's a great question. So certainly one of the things that I was very aware of, and in fact, in many respects, it still hits me almost every day since I moved here, was obviously, I'd come from third world, arguably second, sort of a mixture in between, very much into the first world. And, you come into, the trends and the norms of the first world. And something that I was really, really impressed about is just how dependent sort of UK life, especially like in the city today, how dependent people are on the use of having like a smartphone or a smart device. I mean, just to get around the city or to pay for something or to find out something, you almost couldn't survive in London without a smartphone today. And I mean, obviously, iPhones have been around for a long time. They were certainly around when I still lived in South Africa. But, the dependency on them just to live your day-to-day life here is amazing. And it surprises me
That's
still
quite
every
funny
day.
you say that, because when I first moved here to Sweden, the key to my house is on my phone. It's like a Apple Pay key.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I had it on one. I've got 2 phones, one for work and one for personal use. And I had it on one phone to begin with. And I was always scared my phone would die, or I'd lose it, or it'd get stolen. And then I couldn't get into my house. So I had this like huge anxiety when I first moved. Like, oh God, what if it dies? What if? So my nights out were determined by the length of battery on my phone rather than like how tired I was, which is quite a paradigm shift. But
that's amazing. I didn't realize that was your setup. That's awesome. Yeah. So that was like the big thing. And I said, I mean, that still surprises me every day because, I mean, let's be honest, every time you go into this, well, I mean, obviously you live abroad now, but every time you go into central London, there's one more thing you can do on your phone, be scan a poster or find out why there's a delay on the train. You're just becoming more and more dependent on your technology. So that was something that was a big eye opener to me. And then the second thing, which I think is maybe quite UK specific, was, so obviously I grew up with my home language being English. Learned a bit of Afrikaans at school, and I went to an Afrikaans university, but I've never been amazing at it. But so English was always my language. And you get to the UK, which of course is the home of English, and it was just so amazing, especially at university, just how many different dialects or accents there are. And you'd speak to one person and they sound totally different to the other, and they almost live like they live one county across from each other. It was incredible. And every time, and I mean, I've been fortunate to do a bit of traveling through the UK now, and every time you go somewhere new, you hear like a different version of it or a different dialect of it, or accent rather. Sorry, that's the word, accent. And it's so cool. It's so diverse.
Probably got the most like named words for like a roll, a bread roll, or a bap, or a butty farm, or a batch, or a tea cake. Every different town has their own name for certain things. And you're right. I'm from the north, but I'm lucky. I didn't really. Well, not lucky. I just didn't really get a thick Scouse accent, which has probably helped me in terms of being able to speak with people who aren't from England. But it's interesting to consider. Yeah, you're right. Every 10 miles or 15 kilometers or something, there's an accent change. Even in London, there's like several, and that's one city, right? So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can sit next to 2 people in the tube and they sound completely different to each other, and they both speak the same language. It's amazing.
The diversity of the country in general as well. Obviously, we've got a wonderfully diverse country where everyone's come from all parts of the world and settled here, which has probably assisted that accent change and wherever you're from. So it's probably it's more as an annoyance if you're not from the country, but it's also a bit of honor because we're so diverse. That's always good.
Yeah, no, it's been I've learned a lot about how many different dialects or accents of English there are. That's for sure.
What was the hardest thing about the move, or the hardest thing about the initial living in the UK? Obviously, after the honeymoon period you were saying about before.
Yeah, good question. So I think, I mean, and I think it's true for many people that move abroad, is obviously you miss your family, and you kind of miss your ways of life, and your norms of your own culture. And that was hard. That was definitely hard. And I think it definitely makes you question, whether you've made the right decision. But at the same time, which is both a challenge, but also very exciting, is you get to learn and adapt to new cultures and new norms. And that hasn't been easy at times. You're used to, or you have a certain mindset about a way of life or doing something, and it's totally different. And of course you have to adapt, because you're now living in that country where that's the case. So those have been challenges, but I've overcome them. And actually, in many ways, there's a lot of the British culture which I've integrated into my own personal life, and they're there to stay regardless of wherever I go next.
Out of curiosity, what are a few of those customs you've kind of adapted into your life that you think are British anyway?
Well, a lot of it's to do with food,
which was probably not good.
So, especially even almost came from university days. Fish and chips on a Friday, absolutely love it. It's like a standard of life now. Although we used to do it, obviously it's a huge thing here, like a Sunday roast. Love that. And also just, again, mainly food, just like a couple of nice drinks with friends in the pub. That was something we really didn't do in South Africa much. So that's been a nice way to adjust. And, it's a different way of socializing, and very comforting in the cold winters. The weather is, Northern Hemisphere winters were an adjustment, I can tell you.
You say that, because in Sweden, like, going for a pint after work is not as common as England. I guess because pints cost a mortgage. But it's you don't just go for a couple of drinks. The weekends are really obviously for going out here, but Wednesday nights are kind of like a student night. But you don't have the same kind of drinking culture. There's no pub on every corner or every third corner and stuff. Where in the UK, every kind of residence area has a pub, which is a good place to socialise.
Absolutely. In many respects, the social life here is great. Yeah. I love it. There's never an excuse not to go for a pint. So let's be honest.
No, there's always football on or rugby.
You know what I mean? There's always reason for a drink. Yeah.
Not to sound like alcoholics, but
exactly.
It keeps you warm, right? So that's why it's allowed.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, anything to keep yourself warm in the winter.
And you were saying about obviously your social life in the UK and how it's different from back home, and actually probably not different, because a lot of your friends you kind of hang out with now in London at least are back from South Africa. So how was it making friends in the UK compared to South Africa? How have you found it? Maybe in different cities, it's probably different between Leamington, Oxford, and London. It's 3 different size places.
Good question. I think, again, a lot of it comes down to making friends is about having something in common. So certainly I've made friends not just with British people, but with Europeans and Canadians. And that's also another thing. One of the highlights of living here is that I've met people from all over the world, and I've learnt different views and different perspectives on the world, and that has been so special. And I'll always be grateful for that. But yeah, it's about having that thing in common, I think. So I made some great friends, yourself including, from university. We had common career goals in mind. We had common interests in terms of what interests us personally, from vehicles to what interests us professionally as well. I've met other friends that we had very similar taste in terms of what we do from a social or a personal and social life perspective. Funny enough, even the friends, I've met some new South African friends in London, and some of the things that have drawn us together is we have common taste in terms of things we like to do in the city, So like we've done like all the rooftop bars, and we've done some really cool touristy things. And, it's at having something in common with people that makes you want to spend time with them. And that's how relationships develop.
For you, and I guess a lot of your friends from South Africa, is you're still all tourists, I guess, in the city. And when we were in Oxford together, we were tourists in Oxford, albeit I'd lived there for a bit before we started uni.
Absolutely.
So it's having those people not just to study with, like we did, and did projects with, but also like revising for exams was quite a good.
You almost explore and learn a place and get used to a place together.
We went to the Oxford Union quite a few times to watch some interesting talks, and doing those kind of things where it's not just going for drinks, as you said. It's all the other things like traveling together, going on road trips, and just
It's that having something in common and building experiences and relationships based on it. That's
I think
how
we
you
played
make some pretty
GTA
good
for
friends.
about a week as well at one point when we were first being.
We did, yeah. Yeah, we did some interesting things during COVID. Yeah, a lot of GTA, a lot of board games, those kind of things.
And it's interesting you mentioned before about like obviously being from South Africa and meeting loads of people from all over the world. How did you think people reacted to you, and like what people's first impressions of South Africa was like? Because obviously I've not been there. We were meant to go in 2020, but sadly that didn't happen because of COVID. But my interpretation of South Africa has come from from what I've read in the media. Obviously, a lot of things in the 90s, which Mandela and what he was kind of getting on with. I read Trevor Noah's book, but a lot of things that we don't know an awful lot about the country, or at least I didn't. I was probably quite ignorant. But what has been your kind of lived experience of people's kind of thought towards you?
It's such a great question. And yes, I've been asked about it many times from both friends and just people I've met, either from work or just in passing. So yeah, I think a lot of people didn't know much about the country and were genuinely interested to find out more, which is great. That's a great way to start the conversation. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people's very limited knowledge was very bad knowledge of it. And, South Africa certainly has its issues. We've all heard of the high crime rates and corruption in the governments and all those kind of things. And I'd like to feel, I'd like to be an ambassador for the country because there are many good things about it. And for a holiday destination, it's got to be one of the best in the world. I mean, it is truly beautiful. The people are amazing. The culture is very special because it's very diverse as well. I can say with confidence that I've definitely changed some people's views about it for the better. And I think hopefully, obviously, I've been here for nearly 7 years, so I've met a lot of people that have come and gone. But hopefully, some people have actually said, well, based on what we've learned now, we'll go and check it out.
You mentioned that it's a diverse country. How many languages are spoken in South Africa? Like, I know there's a lot of different tribes.
We have 11 official languages. Wow. Can you believe it?
We have about 11 if you count Scouse, Geordie, Manx. But,
yeah. And, it's so interesting because, it's called the Rainbow Nation because of all the different ethnicities and all the different cultures you find there. And there've been people, we're talking about British heritage, Dutch heritage, a lot of European heritage. Many Europeans came out during the war. Of course, you have all the African tribes and all that kind of stuff. It's a blend of cultures. It's amazing.
Yeah, also, there's penguins, right?
And there's penguins. What more could you want, Penguins on the beach. That's pretty unique.
Definitely. Awesome. I think that's the end of section 2 of the podcast. So we'll see you for section 3. Welcome back and welcome to section 3 of the podcast, which is all about kind of the review of where you've lived and how you found it. I know you're still living there and you've lived in several places, but maybe it's a nice little time for you to recap or kind of give yourself advice for 5 years ago or 6 years ago now, as you said. So I guess my first question is, what would you have done differently 6 years ago if you could go back?
That's a great question. Sure. What would I have done differently? I think I would. Obviously, we were at university to study hard and to get the degrees that we came for, and it was a big commitment. Coming from abroad, obviously very expensive as well. But I maybe would have taken a bit more time out to enjoy. We had some student life, but I maybe would have done a bit more. Maybe played a sport or something like that when I was studying. But honestly speaking, though, and funny enough, I was sort of thinking about this before we started this podcast, what I would have done differently. I think the truth is there's been some very difficult times, COVID being one of them, but there's been some incredible times. And generally, summing it all up, if I had to start again, I would have done it exactly the same way. Because, part of the journey is to make the mistakes and learn the lessons. And we've all made a few. But I wouldn't change a single thing about the experience.
On that, is there one bit of information you'd love to have had though before you moved, or like whether it's a place to live or a place to visit or something to do with British culture?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I did a lot of research before I came here. Not just on how to get a tax number and all that kind of stuff, but how the people were and what to expect. What would I have done
Or it's more
differently?
a
Good
tip for
question.
yourself. What bit of
I don't think I can answer that right now. I mean,
what one thing would you have loved to have known if you could? It could be nothing as well, as you said before. It could just be going in with wanderlust.
yeah. What one thing would I have loved to have known? I think if I knew how good it was going to be or was going to turn out, I probably would have come sooner.
Or you
Is
just
what I would
stopped a bit
say.
more and explored or enjoyed it whilst it was happening.
Yeah,
You maybe have learned
exactly.
that Johnny.
Yeah, but as I said, I
You
mean,
maybe have learned that Johnny's a short version.
yeah. If I knew I was
Yeah,
going to be
because
called Johnny,
before
yeah, I would have prepared myself mentally for it. It's a nickname that's taken a bit
just
of
some
getting used to, but
background
it's
for
all
everyone
good now.
listening or watching. Johnny or Jonathan or John is had never heard the nickname Johnny before coming. He was always Jonathan or John back home. And when I first met
That was a first. Yeah.
Jonathan, I would I just call him Johnny off the bat. I always called everyone who's called Jonathan Johnny because it's just easier for me. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe I was being really rude, and Johnny was like, "What the hell is this guy doing? God, it's not my name."
Yeah. No, no. I mean, it was a nickname I'd never come across before, and I was like, wow, okay, like this seems to be a standard for Jonathan's here. This has caught me off the back of my foot, you know.
In our friends, Everett calls you John, and Felipe calls you John, but I know Ethan and like even like Jake and stuff from university, they all called you Johnny.
Funny enough, my British friends call me Johnny.
Thing, right?
They're pretty much the only people actually. So that's definitely something I've learned about the culture. Jonathan is shortened to Johnny here. That's the thing.
I love that. I remember when we were both living in Leamington. When I first moved to Leamington after you'd been living there for about a year, we were in my house share one time. We were playing a drinking game, and I think it was the dealer one, but I don't want to say the full name because it's got a curse word in it, and I don't want to get taken down. But
yeah. Oh, okay, yes, I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah.
I was obviously. I think Johnny, you had the cards at the time, and it was one where if you're the dealer, you have to drink quite a bit because at the end of the game, it's really easy for everyone else to guess what the card's going to be. And we were all a bit drunk, had a few beers at this point, and I kept calling Johnny Jonathan. And about 5 minutes into it, he goes, "Stop calling me Jonathan! I don't like it. It's just so weird."
Yeah. The problem is when you call me that now, it feels like I'm in trouble.
Yeah, no, not at all. It was just quite funny because you could see yourself getting really confused as to why I was calling you Jonathan. And I was just like, it's quite funny this. I'm going to keep doing it, so what happens? And then you just kind of like, not in a bad way, but you went,
that's so true. I remember that now. Yeah. It's so serious. Yeah. I think, again, like, as I was saying, when you first arrive here, the cultures, the norms are different. But after a while, you get used to it. You adjust, you know.
So that's quite a nice anecdote, really, to kind of end the stories on. But if you could give anyone some advice from South Africa, I guess where you're from, or if they wanted to move to the UK or move to a European nation, what would you tell them to do? What would you give them? What would be the first thing you'd say? What bit of research would you do? Or
great question. So I think to start off with that, definitely, as I said earlier, it's very frightening when you're planning to do it. But my recommendation is do it because you'll never look back. And it's one of those questions that you never want to be later in your life and say, what if? Just do it. It might not work out. It might be amazing, but at least you can say you've tried. In terms of research and preparation, there's a lot to do. Obviously, like from the UK, the gov.uk website is amazing. And I found out a lot of information about how the country works from that website before I came. There's some amazing groups on Facebook. One of them in particular is called South Africans in London, which is probably the biggest. And they are very much an expat sort of advice and friendly chat group. I've asked many a question there over the years that I've been here now, and they've been really helpful. And of course, as I said, there's so many expats from South Africa living in the UK now, London specifically. There's probably one or two people that even if they're old school friends and stuff. Get in touch with them again. Send them a message on Instagram or Facebook. Find out how they're doing, where they live. maybe get a FaceTime session going or something like that. Just ask a couple of questions, just to get a feel for what life's like before there. Everybody will have some unique advice to give in one way or another.
No, it's a really good point about reaching out to friends who you think might live there. I think that's why when I moved to Sweden.
And of course, by all means, I mean, if you're listening to this and if you have a question for myself, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help.
Socials in the kind of show notes for everyone who can send him loads of spam, right? And,
drop the socials.
we control Johnny.
Yeah. No spam. Yeah. But absolutely, I'm always here to ask questions. The best advice is from your own experience.
Well, exactly. This is why I wanted to do this podcast. Was exactly that. So to get people like yourself who've lived abroad and who've done it, as you said, they've done it and they've made mistakes and they've had the hard times, and it's that kind of thing of showing everyone that hey, yeah, it's hard, but it's worth it because even if you don't like it, you can always go. Well, we can always go home. We're very lucky, I guess. Not everyone can always go home, which is quite sad. But there's always an option to go somewhere else. But at least you've done.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, as I said, I mean, you've only been abroad for 6 months, but it enriches your life in a way that you can't even begin to imagine before you've done it. And whatever happens, it'll be an experience that you'll remember for life. It's been the greatest experience of my life. Whatever happens.
So far, anyway.
So far, of course.
So I guess that's a good way of kind of closing this bit now with just a question of what are your future plans? Like, do you want to live anywhere else in the world? Are you happy in the UK for forever? Or do you want to experience other cultures in Europe or other parts of the world itself, or go back home? What would you like to do?
Yeah, great question. So it's a big year for me this year. I'm applying for my citizenship this year, which I'm very happy that I've come to that time now, and quite proud that I'm at that point to do it, and looking forward to putting that application in, and hopefully it's successful, fingers crossed. And that's going to be sort of the majority of this year. Quite frankly, to be honest with you, I'm really happy with where I am right now. I mean, I've got a great setup. I'm really enjoying London. I'm still quite new to the city, and there's so much to do here. So I'm enjoying, working and still getting to know the city and sort of enjoying London life for a bit. Future plans, I would definitely like to travel more of Europe. I'm not sure if I would move anywhere else right now. As I said, I do enjoy living in the UK. And maybe one day I will go back to South Africa. You never know.
First stop,
never say never. Yeah. But for the time being, got a few plans and enjoying living the UK.
Yeah, and then first stop for Europe for you is obviously Sweden, right? So you can come and see me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're definitely going to plan something later in the year. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so that's kind of the end of section 3. So thank you very much, Johnny, for your time. And hey guys, so that was Johnny or Jonathan or John, however you want to call him. Take any name. So thank you for listening, and thank you for getting this far in the podcast. It was really good talking to Johnny. You see, we've been friends for 6.5 years, and we don't always talk specifically about one point like this move to another country, which is really quite nice. And I've learned quite a lot about you. Even though we've been friends for 6.5 years, there's still more to know, which has been great, and I've really appreciated it.
That's
really
so true.
Appreciated your time on this, and thank you for helping me out. And I hope you've really enjoyed it, and it's been quite cathartic for yourself. And just to end with,
it's been great.
Just to end really, I want to just if you have enjoyed the podcast or you want to share it with a friend, then please leave a review on Apple or Spotify now have reviews or whatever you're listening to this on. Please. And share it with some friends as well, and get the word out. If you know someone who wants to live abroad, then it's great thing to share with them. Or if you want to live abroad, then keep listening to more. And then if you want to get in touch, please feel free to add us on socials. They're in the show notes below. And we'll see you next time for the Expat Pod.